This dance is for the one I've secretly loved all these 10 years, my husband announced at our wedding reception. He walked right past me and invited my sister to dance. The entire room erupted in applause. But then I walked up to my father, who was sitting at the head table, and asked one loud question that made my husband choke and sent my sister to the emergency room. Hello, everyone. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Enjoy the story. But before that moment, before that question was even uttered, there was the party. The biggest, loudest, most lavish celebration our city had ever seen. The wedding hall at the Grand Magnolia Ballroom buzzed like a disturbed hive. Hundreds of guests, the entire business and social elite of our thriving mid-sized city, ate, drank, and laughed. The string orchestra played something light and non-intrusive. Crystal chandeliers bathed everything in a warm golden glow, and servers glided silently between the tables, delivering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Nia Hayes sat at the main table in the bride's spot in her flawless white gown, feeling like an exhibit in a museum. She smiled, nodded, and accepted congratulations, but a dull, inexplicable dread was building inside her. Her husband, Darius Vance, who had become her husband just 3 hours earlier, was magnificent. Tall, charming, in a designer tuxedo, he was the life of the party. He moved easily from table to table, shaking men's hands, kissing the ladies' cheeks, his infectious laugh echoing across the floor. He was the ideal son-in-law for her father, Elijah Hayes, ambitious, sharp, from a good, though recently struggling family. He was the perfect husband for her, Nia, the reliable, serious, elder daughter who had spent her entire life doing exactly what was expected of her. She looked at her father. Elijah Hayes, silver-haired and authoritative, sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne. He was pleased. Everything was going according to his plan. His business empire, built on food processing, was now cemented by this strategic corporate merger. He occasionally cast approving glances at Nia, and those glances made her uneasy, as if she had just been successfully sold. Next to her father sat her younger sister, Simone, bright, capricious, and always the center of attention. Today she wore a tight, wine-red dress that accentuated her figure. Simone was bored. She listlessly poked at her dessert and shot sultry glances at Darius. Nia was used to those glances. Simone always looked that way at everything that belonged to Nia. First her toys, then her friends, and now her husband. But Darius, it seemed, paid her no mind. At least, not today. The MC for the evening, specially flown in from Los Angeles, announced a toast from the groom. Darius walked to the center of the room and took the microphone. The guests quieted down, turning toward him. He surveyed them with a beaming smile that, however, did not linger on Nia. "My dear friends, my dearest family," he began, his smooth baritone filling the hall. "I am the happiest man alive. Today, I have joined my life with the Hayes family, a family I have known and respected for 10 years. 10 long years." He paused, and there was something theatrical, something rehearsed about that silence. A lot has happened over these years, but all this time, one secret, one great love, has lived in my heart. The guests hummed approvingly. How romantic. Nia felt a cold knot tighten in her throat. She had known Darius for exactly 10 years. He came to their factory as a young specialist right out of college. But she remembered no secret love. Their relationship had begun just 1 year ago, swiftly and frankly, professionally. Her father introduced him as a promising young executive, and things took off. And I believe that today, on this most important day, I must finally be honest. With all of you, and with myself, Darius continued, raising his voice. He looked toward the head table, but not at Nia. His gaze was fixed on Simone. This dance, this first dance in my new life, is for the one I've secretly loved all these 10 years. Nia's heart skipped a beat. What was this? Some idiotic joke? A prank? The orchestra struck up a slow, tender melody. Darius, still holding the microphone, walked toward the main table. He was coming straight for her. Nia began to rise from her seat, tangling herself in the folds of her wedding dress, ready to accept his hand. But he walked past. He did not even glance at her. He passed just 3 feet from her chair, leaving a trail of expensive cologne and icy humiliation in his wake. He approached Simone. Simone blossomed. There wasn't a shadow of surprise on her face, only triumph. She rose gracefully, extended her hand, and he led her to the center of the floor. The world narrowed down to that one spot for Nia. Her husband was twirling her sister in a dance. And at that moment, the worst thing happened. The guests, they started applauding. Tentatively at first, then louder and louder. They didn't understand. They decided it was some grand gesture, a touching family tradition. Oh, how sweet! What a surprise! So touching! A dance with the maid of honor! Echoed from every side. The applause hammered like a funeral march for her life. Nia sat in her white gown under that golden light and felt herself shattering into a million pieces. She saw her father's smiling face, applauding too, approving this farce. She saw Darius's back and Simone's happy face resting on his shoulder. She was superfluous at this celebration. She was merely a function, a shield for something else. She wanted to scream, to run away, to break down right here in front of hundreds of eyes. But instead, something inside her clicked, something cold, hard, and sharp as ice. She remembered a conversation with her father 2 months ago, his harsh words, his ultimatum. "You will marry Vance. It is non-negotiable. He has to become part of the family. He has a debt hanging over his head that could sink both him and us if it surfaces the wrong way. You are the guarantee. You are the cement for this deal." Back then, she didn't argue. She had always been the obedient daughter. But now everything had changed. The deal was done. She had fulfilled her part, and they had simply thrown her away. The tears dried before they even began. She slowly, very slowly, placed her glass of champagne on the table. She took another, full glass, and stood up. The ringing in her ears muffled the music and the applause. She saw only one target, her father. She walked toward him. Every step was an effort, as if she were wading through thick water. Her voluminous dress snagged on the legs of chairs. Guests stepped aside, looking bewildered at the bride who had abandoned her seat. The music was still playing. Darius and Simone were still dancing, oblivious to everything around them. She reached the head table, stopping directly in front of her father. He stopped applauding and looked up at her with cold annoyance, as if to say, "What do you want? Don't interrupt." Nia took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and asked the question. She did not yell, she did not cry. She spoke loudly and clearly, so everyone in the room heard her in the sudden silence, because the music abruptly cut off mid-note. "Father," her voice was even and cold, "since Darius just confessed his love for Simone, does this mean you're forgiving the $750,000 debt that you forced me to marry him to cover?" Time stopped. The applause died as abruptly as if it had been cut off with a knife. Someone dropped a fork, and the clatter of metal on the plate seemed deafening. An absolute, deadly silence fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on her, on her father, on the dancing couple frozen in the center of the floor. Darius choked. He coughed so violently he doubled over. The champagne he had drunk before his toast caught in his throat. His face flushed red. Simone pulled away from him. Her eyes were wide with horror. She looked at Nia, then at her father, then at the guests. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, admiring just a minute ago, now drilled into her like an auger. A public exposure. Not just the exposure of an affair, but the exposure that she had been a commodity in a dirty financial deal. Her face went as white as the tablecloth. She began to gasp for air. Her chest heaved spasmodically. I, she croaked, and suddenly her legs gave way. She collapsed to the floor like a cut flower. Panic erupted. Someone screamed. Guests scrambled from their seats. Her father jumped up, overturning the table. "A doctor! Call an ambulance immediately!" he yelled, rushing towards Simone. Darius, still coughing, rushed over too. The hall dissolved into chaos, a blur of motion. Someone was on the phone. Others were trying to revive Simone. Naya stood in the same spot, clutching the still full glass of champagne. She watched the pandemonium, feeling neither schadenfreude nor satisfaction. Only emptiness. 10 minutes later, medics arrived. They swiftly and professionally loaded Simone onto a stretcher. She was unconscious. As they carried her past Nia, one of the paramedics gave her a swift, judgmental glance, as if she were to blame for everything. The stretcher was wheeled out of the room. Darius bolted after them. At that moment, Naya looked at her father. She expected anything, a scream, an accusation, maybe even a physical blow. But she was looking for even a drop of support in his eyes. She was still his daughter. Elijah straightened up. He turned to her, his face purple with rage. He stepped right up to her. His eyes were glacial. He seized her arm above the elbow. His fingers dug into her skin like claws. "You foolish girl," he hissed so quietly that no one but her could hear. Hatred rang in his voice. "You didn't expose him. You just destroyed this family." He flung her arm away, turned, and strode quickly toward the exit, following the ambulance without looking back. Nia was left alone. In the middle of a ruined celebration, in her pristine white wedding dress, which now felt like a shroud. Guests watched her with judgment, fear, and curiosity. She was the center of attention, but she had never felt more isolated in her life. The family had just passed judgment on her. Nia remained standing there. The guests, seized by a wave of awkwardness, quickly offered hurried farewells and dispersed, careful not to meet her gaze. The grand Magnolia Ballroom, full of laughter and music just 10 minutes ago, rapidly emptied. Servers silently cleared the nearly untouched food from the tables. The party was dead. She set the glass down. Her hands were steady. Everything inside her was burned to ash. Only cold, ringing cinder remained. She had to do something, go somewhere. After the official part, the family and closest friends always gathered in the smaller banquet room for a private celebration. She was family. At least she thought she was until this evening. Gathering the hem of the heavy, now alien-feeling dress, she walked toward the inconspicuous door at the end of the corridor. Marcus, the security guard, whom she had known for years, blocked her path. He wouldn't meet her eyes. His gaze was fixed elsewhere, on the richly decorated wall. "Ms. Hayes, you can't go in there." His words were quiet, almost apologetic. "What do you mean, I can't, Marcus?" Naya's voice was even, devoid of emotion. "My family is in there." Mr. Hayes gave the order. He finally met her eyes, which held a mixture of pity and fear. "Said you weren't to be admitted." It was the first blow. Direct, without pretense. She had been erased. She was no longer part of the inner circle. She nodded, unwilling to show him her humiliation, turned and walked toward the exit. The coat check attendant silently handed her a light coat, which she draped over her shoulders on top of her wedding dress. Outside, the cool night air hit her. She hailed a cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, curiously studying the bride without a groom in his rearview mirror. Nia gave the address of the new condo her father had gifted her and Darius for the wedding. Their love nest, her new home. The ride through the city at night was surreal. Glowing storefronts, sparse pedestrians, the traffic lights. It all seemed like scenes from someone else's movie. The cab stopped at the new exclusive high-rise. The concierge, greeting her politely, opened the door. She rode the elevator up to her floor, walked to the door of their apartment, number 77, and put her key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. She tried again. Then again. Useless. She jiggled the handle. Locked. The lock had been changed. In the time it took her to get there, someone had already arrived and replaced the lock. Darius, or her father's people, so fast, so mercilessly. She rested her forehead against the cold metal door. Behind that door were her things, her clothes, her books, a part of her life to which access had just been cut off. The phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She pulled it out. The name Father flashed on the screen. She answered. "Hello? Where are you?" Her father's voice was icy, businesslike, no emotion. "At the door of my apartment, which I can't get into." "That is no longer your apartment or your job. As of tomorrow, you are fired from the factory," he continued, dictating the words, "for the public scandal that damaged the company's and the family's reputation. Your bank accounts are frozen. All of them were tied to corporate accounts, so don't try to withdraw a penny. That's all. Don't call this number again." The line went dead. He had hung up. The banishment was complete and final. No job, no money, no home. She slowly sank to the floor in the empty hallway, leaning her back against the wall, the wedding dress spread around her like a white cloud. She needed to call someone. There had to be someone. She found the number for Mr. Sterling, her father's longtime business partner. He had known her since childhood, always calling her sweetheart. He answered after the third ring. "Hello, Mr. Sterling. It's Nia Hayes." A heavy pause hung on the other end. "Nia, I'm very busy right now," he quickly stammered. "Can't talk," and hung up without letting her finish, without asking what was wrong. She felt the first tear roll down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. Can't fall apart now. She dialed another number. Mrs. Dubois, her late mother's friend, who hugged her at every meeting and said how much she resembled her mother. "Yes, sweetie." Her voice sounded worried. The rumors must have already spread through the city. "Mrs. Dubois? Hello? I'm in trouble. I have nowhere to sleep tonight. Could I—" The line suddenly cut off. Nia looked at the screen. Call ended. She called back. The subscriber was unavailable. She had been blocked. That was it. Her entire world, so stable and predictable, had ceased to exist within the span of an hour. She was a pariah, a toxic asset that everyone was rushing to discard. She stood up. She had to go. But where? Then an image surfaced in her memory. An old house on the outskirts of the city, overgrown with wild ivy. A house her father had strictly forbidden her to ever visit. The home of her Aunt Vivian, her father's older sister, with whom he hadn't spoken in 20 years. "She is poison to this family. Forget she exists," he had told her once when Nia was a teenager. Now that poison was her only hope. She went outside. It began to rain, a fine, cold, unpleasant drizzle. It immediately began to soak through the thin fabric of her coat and wedding dress. She walked. She had no money for a cab, and asking a driver for a free ride was beyond her. She walked across the entire city, and her wedding attire turned into a soggy, dirty mess. Her heels clicked on the wet asphalt. People, the few pedestrians, shied away from the strange figure of the bride, trudging alone in the rain. Her makeup ran, leaving dark streaks on her cheeks. An hour later, she reached the location, an old but sturdy brick house, set back in an overgrown yard. Lights were on in the windows. She approached the heavy wooden door and knocked. The door was opened by a tall, thin woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Vivian. She strongly resembled her father, the same sharp features, but her eyes looked different, not commanding but penetrating, as if they saw right through a person. She looked at Nia, at her wet dress, at her smeared mascara. No surprise or pity registered on her face. "I was waiting for one of Elijah's children to finally see the truth," she said in a steady, calm voice. "Come in. You'll catch cold." Inside, the house was simple but cozy. It smelled of dried herbs and old books. Vivian gave her a large, soft towel and an old but warm bathrobe. While Nia changed in the bathroom, Vivian brewed tea. They sat in the kitchen. Nia silently drank the hot, sweet tea, trying to warm up. "So, he threw you out." It wasn't a question, but a statement. Vivian looked at her with her clear, cool eyes. Nia nodded. He said I destroyed the family because of some debt Darius had. Vivian gave a bitter laugh. Poor naive girl. You still think this is about Darius? Nia looked up at her. Who else? Father said Vance had a $750,000 debt, and that this marriage was a way to tie him down, force him to work for the family to pay back every penny. Elijah always knew how to spin a good lie, Vivian cut in. She leaned across the table toward Nia. The debt was indeed $750,000, only it wasn't Darius's debt. She paused, letting the words sink in. It was Simone's debt. Your little sister's. Nia gasped for breath. What? How? Very simple, Vivian continued mercilessly. For the last few years, your sister has been living a double life. While you were working at the factory, controlling product quality, she was flying out to Miami and Vegas. Luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, designer clothes. She always wanted a lifestyle beyond her means. She borrowed money from shady lenders at insane interest rates. When the debt climbed to $750,000 and the creditors threatened to come to Elijah, he flew into a rage. But Simone, his darling, his favorite, he couldn't let a scandal touch her name. Vivian leaned back in her chair. And then Darius came along. Ambitious, handsome, from a good family, but broke. The perfect candidate. Elijah offered him a deal. He pays off Simone's debt, and Darius gets married. But not to Simone. No, Simone had to stay clean. He had to marry you, the reliable, obedient Nia, who never asks too many questions. That way he tied Darius to the family, making him beholden. And you were the payment in the deal, the collateral. The world had just turned over again. The betrayal was deeper, uglier than she could have imagined. She wasn't just a humiliated bride. She was a bargaining chip in an operation to save her sister's reputation. Nia sat with her head bowed. She didn't have the strength even for anger, only a dull, all-consuming ache. What am I supposed to do now? She whispered. Vivian was silent for a moment, watching her intently. Then she stood up, walked to an old dresser, and took something small from a drawer. She returned and placed an old, tarnished key on a simple string in front of Nia. For starters, stop seeing yourself as a victim. Your mother was not a fool, Nia. She saw your father and sister for who they were. She left you tools. Nia stared at the old key lying on the kitchen table. It was heavy, a real key, the kind they didn't make anymore. Tools. Her aunt's word echoed in her head. She picked up the key, and the cold metal seemed to pass on a piece of its hardness to her. What is this key for? She asked, looking up at Vivian. A small studio in an old district near the river bend, Vivian answered, collecting the teacups. Your mother bought it long before she died, kept it a secret from Elijah. She called it her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe and think without his constant control. He never found out about it. After her death, I kept paying the bills so the apartment wouldn't be taken. I knew it might be needed one day. Nia spent the night at her aunt's in a small guest room. She didn't sleep. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the last 24 hours. Humiliation, banishment, betrayal. And now, this secret left by her mother. In the morning, Vivian gave her a little cash for the time being and some simple clothes, dark slacks and a gray sweater that once belonged to her daughter. Changing out of her aunt's bathrobe, Nia felt a semblance of composure for the first time in hours. The wedding dress, dirty and crumpled, lay in a shapeless heap in the corner. I wrote down the address for you, Vivian said as Nia left. Go, Nia, and remember, your mother was the strongest person I ever knew. Far stronger than your father. She had to take the bus. She sat by the window watching the city pass by, a city that was no longer hers. There was the bakery where she and her father ate ice cream when she was little. There was the theater where Darius took her on their first date, and there was the massive gray building of their factory, Hayes Family Foods, where she had worked for the last 15 years. All of it was now part of someone else's life. The house near Riverbend turned out to be an ordinary, worn-down 3-story brick walk-up. No concierges or shining lobbies. Nia climbed the creaking staircase to the 3rd floor and found door number 24. Her heart hammered. She inserted the old key into the lock. It turned with a loud, rusty screech. The door opened, and Nia stepped into the past. The apartment was tiny but perfectly clean. The air was stale, smelling of dust and time. Simple furniture, a sofa bed, an armchair, a writing desk by the window, a small kitchen behind a curtain. Everything was in its place, covered by a fine layer of dust. It was as if the owner had just stepped out and would return any minute. On the wall hung a tear-off calendar, frozen on a date from 10 years ago, the day her mother died. Nia slowly walked around the room, running her hand across the desk. What was she looking for? What tools? She opened the closet. A few of her mother's simple dresses hung there, her old coat. Stacks of books lined the shelves. Nothing unusual. Her gaze fell on the writing desk. It was empty except for an old desk lamp. She pulled the drawers. The top 2 were unlocked. Inside were stacks of clean paper, pens, paper clips, everything as expected from a person who valued order. But the bottom drawer was locked. Nia took out the key Vivian had given her. It didn't fit. She tried turning it this way and that, but it was no use. Disappointment swelled in her throat. Had it all been for nothing? She sat in the chair and looked around. Her gaze fell once more on the calendar. 10 years. She walked up to it, touched the yellowed leaf, and suddenly noticed a tiny scratch on the wall behind it, as if something had been hidden. She carefully peeled back the corner of the calendar. Taped to the wall was a small key, a cabinet lock key, secured with a piece of tape. Her hands trembled slightly as she inserted the tiny key into the lock of the bottom drawer. It clicked. She pulled the drawer open. Inside lay one single item, a thick ledger with a hard, dark green cover. Nia pulled it out and placed it on the desk. It wasn't a diary. The first page, in her mother's neat, tiny handwriting, read, "Inconsistency log, Production Bay 2." She began to flip through the pages, a chill creeping over her with every turn. It was a meticulous, detailed record of all production anomalies during the last 2 years of her mother's life. Dates, batch numbers, product names, and 2 columns. The official reason for disposal and the actual fate of the goods. A record from March 15th. Product, premium beef stew, batch number 481. Disposed, 800 cans. Official reason, seal integrity breach during transport. And next to it, in the other column, actual fate, sold via A.V. Johnson, cash payment. Sum delivered to E.P. Hayes. Record from April 29th. Product, condensed milk. Batch number 512. Disposed, 1,200 cans. Official reason, manufacturing defect, fat content non-compliant with standard. Next to it, actual fate, sold at City Market. Cash payment. Sum delivered to E.P. Hayes. Page after page, dozens of entries, hundreds of thousands of units of product that were logged as defect, spoilage, or breakage, but were actually sold on the side for cash. This was an entire underground business empire operating parallel to the official one. Her father had been stealing from his own company for years. She, as the head of quality control, hadn't seen anything or hadn't wanted to. She believed the documents he supplied her. Nia closed the book. This was the tool, not just proof of theft, but a weapon. But she didn't know how to use it. These entries were just numbers. She needed someone who could confirm how these massive batches of disposed goods could quietly leave the warehouses. Someone from the inside. And she remembered. Calvin. Mr. Calvin Jasper, the stern, taciturn warehouse foreman who had worked at the factory even before she was born. He was the only one in the planning meetings who dared to argue with her father, for which her father hated him and constantly threatened to fire him. But he didn't fire him because no one knew the warehouse operations better than Calvin. And most importantly, Calvin deeply respected her mother. He often told Nia, "Your mother was a woman of conscience." She found his number in an old contact book on her phone. She called. Calvin didn't answer right away. His voice on the phone sounded tired and guarded. "Mr. Jasper, it's Nia Hayes." "Nia." He paused. "I heard what happened. My condolences." "I need your help," she said quickly. "It's vital and it concerns my mother." The mention of her mother worked. "What is it?" "I can't talk on the phone. Let's meet somewhere where we won't be seen." He paused, considering. "Okay, in 1 hour at the old bus depot by Platform 7. The bus depot was a noisy, bustling place, perfect for blending into the crowd. Nia arrived early, sat on a bench, tightly clutching the bag containing the ledger. She felt a mix of fear and hope. Calvin was her only chance. He appeared exactly at the appointed time. But it wasn't the Calvin she knew. He looked frightened. His eyes darted around. He kept looking over his shoulder. He walked up to her, but didn't sit down. "Talk fast," he snapped, not looking at her. "Mr. Jasper, I found some of my mother's records," she began, opening her bag. "They prove that Father has been selling products off the books for years. Here, look." She reached to pull out the book, but he recoiled from her as if she were infected. "No, don't," he muttered, raising his hands. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" Nia couldn't believe her ears. "This is our chance to fix everything, to restore justice for my mother's memory." He finally looked her in the eyes, and his gaze was one of desperate pleading. "I can't, Nia. Mr. Elijah Hayes, he just promoted me." Nia froze. "I'm the new head of quality control," he said, every word clearly difficult to utter. "I took your old spot. With 3 times the salary. My wife is sick. I have grandkids. I can't. I'm sorry." He turned and walked away without looking back, quickly dissolving into the crowd of passengers rushing for their buses. Nia remained sitting on the bench, alone amidst the noise and commotion of strangers' lives. Her last hope had just walked away, leaving her in complete and utter isolation. Nia stayed sitting on the bench. Buses arrived and departed, people hurried and bustled, but she sat motionless, clutching the bag with her now useless treasure. Calvin's betrayal was worse than her father's blow. Her father was an enemy. Anything could be expected of him. But Calvin, he was the last thread connecting her to the past, to the memory of her mother, to the belief that decency still existed. And that thread had just been cut, bought for 30 pieces of silver, her own job. She didn't know how long she sat there. She only snapped out of it when a police patrol car stopped nearby. A young sergeant looked at her sympathetically. "Ma'am, are you all right? You've been sitting here for 2 hours without moving." "I'm fine," Nia replied dully, standing up. "I was just waiting. I'm leaving now." The walk back to Vivian's house seemed even longer. Her legs felt like cotton, and her head was foggy. She returned to the old house on the outskirts like a beaten dog. Vivian met her at the doorstep. She didn't ask anything. She understood everything from Nia's face. She silently led her to the kitchen and poured another cup of tea. Nia told her everything. About Calvin's terrified eyes, about his promotion. She expected her aunt to be disappointed, to give up, but Vivian merely pressed her lips into a thin, hard line. "I knew it," she said, cold anger ringing in her voice. "That's his method. Elijah doesn't just punish his enemies, he buys his friends. He finds a person's weak spot, a sick wife, a mortgage, the fear of poverty, and presses on it until they break. Calvin isn't a traitor, Nia. He's another one of his victims. But what am I supposed to do now?" Desperation surfaced in Nia's voice. "Without testimony from the inside, that ledger is just a piece of paper." Vivian stood up and walked to the window, clasping her hands behind her back. "If you can't get in through the door, you have to look for a window. There's one more person in this city who hates your father as much as I do, maybe more." "Who is it?" "His name is Andre Thorne," Vivian said slowly. "He used to be the best investigative journalist in our state. Sharp, aggressive, afraid of nothing. 5 years ago, he started digging into one of Elijah's deals involving product supply to state school systems. He got too close. And what did Father do to him? He didn't threaten or bribe him. That would have been too simple, Vivian scoffed. Elijah set things up to make it look like Andre himself was taking bribes for his expose articles. Phony witnesses, fabricated audio recordings. Andre was fired in disgrace. The managing editor of his newspaper, his best friend, publicly disavowed him. Everyone turned their back on him. Elijah didn't just break his career. He destroyed his name, his reputation. He ground him into the dirt. Nia listened, and a faint hope sparked within her. Where can I find him? I'm afraid he's not in a good place right now. The last I heard, he's writing cheap ad copy for some little outfit called Creative Plus. It's in the basement of an old business center. Finding Creative Plus wasn't hard. A faded plastic sign hung above a steep stairwell leading to a basement. Nia descended. The sharp smell of cheap tobacco, instant coffee, and stale air hit her nose. In the small room, cluttered with papers, a man in his 40s sat behind an old computer, thin, with dark circles under his eyes and 3 days of stubble. An overflowing ashtray sat on the desk in front of him. "What do you need?" he asked, without looking up from the monitor. "Car wash slogans are on sale today." "I need Andre Thorne." "Well, you found him." He finally looked away from the screen. His eyes were tired and cynical. "To what do I owe the visit of a respectable lady to my crypt?" Nia walked closer and placed her mother's ledger on his desk. "My name is Nia Hayes, and I need your help." "My father?" He chuckled, seeing her surname. "Hayes? The daughter of the great Elijah Hayes? Are you having a family dispute? Sorry, I'm not interested. I don't dig through other people's dirty laundry anymore, especially the Hayes families. Once was enough for me." He demonstratively turned back to his computer. "I know what he did to you," Nia said firmly, "and I have proof that he was defrauding his own factory for years." Andre turned back to her. A flicker of interest crossed his eyes, but quickly vanished. "Proof?" He scoffed skeptically, but nevertheless picked up the ledger and lazily flipped through a few pages. Neat handwriting, numbers, dates. "And what does this prove? That your dad didn't pay taxes on part of his profit?" "Minor tax fraud. Every other businessman in our city does it. In court, he'll say it's a forgery, that a resentful daughter is seeking revenge. No prosecutor will touch a case like this against Elijah Hayes. Go home, miss. Don't waste my time or yours." He pushed the book away. Nia felt the floor drop out from under her. Was he going to refuse too? Desperation gave her strength. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just theft." She grabbed the book, frantically turning pages. "There's a system here. Look at the dates." She jabbed her finger at a few consecutive entries. "Here, October 28th, the last Friday of the month. Here, November 25th, the last Friday. December 30th, also the last Friday. They were disposing of huge batches of goods on the same day every month. That can't be a coincidence." Andre froze. He picked up the ledger with a different, more focused movement. He looked closely at the dates Nia pointed out. The cynical mask on his face began to crack. He flipped through a few more pages. His eyes scanned the lines quickly. "The last Friday of every month," he muttered to himself. A spark ignited in his dull eyes, that same spark of excitement that Elijah Hayes had tried to extinguish 5 years ago. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. "Wait here." He walked to a huge metal cabinet in the corner of the room, fumbled with a ring of keys for a long time, and finally opened it with a screech. The cabinet was crammed with old, dusty files and newspaper clippings. This was his private archive, everything that remained of his past life. He pulled out several thick folders labeled City News from different years and dumped them onto the desk. Dust billowed into the air. He started working quickly, focused like a surgeon. He opened the ledger to the first date Nia mentioned and began sifting through the yellowed newspaper sheets. "Okay, October, 10 years ago, last Friday," he mumbled. "Here it is." He spread out a newspaper spread and showed Nia. There was a photo on the front page, a smiling Elijah Hayes shaking hands with the director of the city children's home, and under the photo, a huge headline, "Generous donation from Hayes Family Foods." The children's home received a shipment of beef stew and condensed milk. Nia gasped. She looked at the ledger. The date matched, the products matched. Only in the ledger, they were listed as defect, seal integrity breach. "Next date, quickly," Andre said feverishly. He no longer looked like a burned-out ad writer. He was a bloodhound picking up a scent. November, and another article. Help for veterans. Elijah Hayes donated food baskets to the City Veterans Council. December. Holiday miracle. School Intermediate Number 3 thanks the Hayes family for holiday gifts. And every time, in her mother's ledger, these same products were recorded as spoiled, non-compliant with standard, disposed of. Andre leaned back in his chair and looked at Nia. His face was pale. "My God," he whispered, "these weren't disposed goods. This was charity. He got public recognition and huge tax write-offs for them for years. But he was actually donating spoiled goods. He was feeding orphans and the elderly what should have gone to the dump." Now this was no longer just fraud. This was monstrous. "I'll help you," Andre said firmly. Steel rang in his voice. "We will destroy him." He grabbed his phone to make the first call to an old contact at a competing regional newspaper, the only major publication not controlled by Elijah Hayes. But before he could dial the number, a notification popped up on his smartphone screen. "Urgent news from the main city portal." Andre stopped mid-motion. He silently turned the phone screen toward Nia. The screen displayed a large, glossy photograph. Darius and Simone. They stood embracing in front of the Hayes Family Foods logo. Both were beaming with happiness, and beneath the photo was a headline in bold type. "Love triumphs. Hayes Family Foods announces new director Darius Vance, following annulment of marriage to vengeful bride." Andre clicked the link. The article opened instantly, taking up the whole screen. It wasn't just news. It was a verdict, delivered and executed in front of the entire city. Nia read, and the words blurred before her eyes, then gathered again into ugly, venomous sentences. The text was written smoothly, professionally, with cleverly placed emphasis on pity and sympathy for everyone except her. The tragic love story that was nearly destroyed by a moment of weakness and female jealousy, the article proclaimed. As our portal learned, the decision to annul the marriage between Darius Vance and Nia Hayes was mutual and made hours before the ceremony. Nia, unable to cope with the bitter truth that her fiancé's heart belonged to another, staged a disgraceful scene at the wedding, attempting to slander not only her former beloved but her own family. Andre read the excerpts aloud, his voice devoid of all emotion, which made the words cut even deeper. In an exclusive interview with our correspondent, the heartbroken but strong-willed Simone Hayes, who is now recovering from a nervous breakdown, and her faithful beloved Darius Vance shared their story. Blah, blah, blah. "We loved each other for 10 years, but duty to the family and respect for my older sister prevented us from being together," he quoted Darius. "When Nia learned the truth, we agreed to part as friends. I don't know what came over her. Perhaps the pain was too much." The story about the debt was a complete fabrication, the ranting of a jealous, resentful woman. Then more followed. The article cited sources close to the family who claimed Nia had always been difficult, withdrawn, and envious of her brighter, more outgoing sister. Her question to her father at the wedding was presented as a premeditated, vengeful act aimed at destroying the family business out of personal spite. "They're not just defending themselves," Andre said, putting down the phone. His face was serious. "They're attacking. They're creating an image of you, the crazy, vengeful old maid. And they did it in one night, fast, professional. Your father didn't waste any time." Nia was silent. She felt herself being slowly encased in concrete. She hadn't just been kicked out. She was being erased, and an ugly caricature was being painted in her place. Now she was not the victim of betrayal. She was the villain. She returned to Vivian's house, devastated. Her aunt had already read everything online. She just shook her head. That's his style. First, destroy the reputation, and then you can do anything you want with the person. The whole city is already talking about you, Nia. Nia felt that the very next day. She needed to go to the drugstore for a painkiller. Her head was splitting from the tension. She pulled the hood of an old jacket Vivian gave her over her head and went outside. She ran into Ms. Davis, their neighbor from the old apartment where Nia grew up. Ms. Davis always smiled kindly and asked about her work. Seeing Nia, Ms. Davis froze for a second. Her face stretched into a look of fear. She pretended not to see her and sharply crossed to the other side of the street, almost getting hit by a car, literally running away. At the drugstore, the young pharmacist, who just a week ago had admired her and asked about the wedding preparations, served her with an icy face, not saying a word and slamming the change on the counter. People stared at her from everywhere, from the windows of houses, from passing cars. People whispered behind her back. She heard fragments of phrases. "That Hayes girl! What a disgrace! To set up her own father like that!" She was not just an outcast. She had become a leper in her own city. The social pressure was almost physically palpable. It weighed on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. That evening, she was back in Andre's basement office. "The ledger is good," he said, pacing nervously in his cramped space. "But it's not enough now. They've poisoned public opinion. If we come out with those records now, everyone will say it's part of your revenge, that you forged your mother's handwriting to destroy your father and sister. We need something else, something that proves this wasn't just tax fraud but a long, cynical conspiracy. We need proof that Simone and Darius were in on it with your father, that they knew." Nia sat on the shaky stool, staring blankly at his computer screen where that same photograph still hung, the happy, radiant faces of the victors. Darius, Simone. Her gaze automatically skimmed over their clothes and hairstyles, and suddenly it caught on something glittering on Simone's neck. She leaned in. Andre noticed her tense gaze. "What is it?" "Zoom in on the photo," Nia requested, her voice hoarse. With a few clicks of the mouse, Andre magnified the image. Now Simone's neck and chest were visible in full detail. She was wearing a necklace, a delicate gold chain with 3 large, dark blue stones surrounded by a scattering of tiny diamonds. Sapphires. Nia stared at the necklace, and a glacial chill slowly began to rise from her stomach to her throat. She knew that piece. Every facet, every curve. She had seen it hundreds of times in the jewelry box on her mother's dresser. That's impossible," she whispered. It wasn't just anger that seized her. It was cold, sticky horror. She jumped up, overturning the chair. "I have to go," she blurted to a stunned Andre, running out of the basement without hearing his questions. She was almost running through the evening streets. One thought hammered in her head, one image, that necklace. She burst into Vivian's house like a whirlwind. Her aunt, reading in an armchair, looked up at her in surprise. "Aunt Vivian," Nia was gasping for breath. "My mother's necklace, her main piece. Do you remember it?" "Of course I remember," Vivian replied slowly, putting down her book. "The antique French work, deep cornflower blue sapphires. Grandmother called them widow's tears. Why?" "It's on Simone," Nia exhaled. "In that photo online, on her, around her neck." Vivian's face turned to stone. She slowly rose from the armchair. "Show me." Nia, with trembling hands, pulled out her phone, found the article, and handed it to her aunt. Vivian took the phone, holding it close to her eyes. For a few seconds, she stared at the screen in silence. When she lowered the phone, her face was gray. "Yes, it's it. There's no doubt." "But how?" Nia whispered. "Where did she get it? Father would never have let her take Mom's things. Never." "He didn't allow it," Vivian said quietly. Her voice was full of strange, terrifying certainty, because he didn't even know where it was. Nia stared at her, not understanding. "That necklace, Nia, Vivian continued, looking her straight in the eye, and there was an abyss in her gaze. Her most treasured piece. It went missing from her jewelry box on the day she died. Nia's legs buckled, and she sank into a chair. She couldn't breathe. On that very day, Vivian finished, her words falling into the silence like a stone into a deep well. 10 years ago, the very day Darius Vance first crossed the threshold of your factory, and the very day he now tells everyone his secret love for Simone began. Vivian's words hung in the air. The day of death, the day Darius appeared, the day the secret love began. 3 points that suddenly connected into one ugly, sickening line. This was no longer just betrayal or humiliation. This was a nauseating, sticky web of lies woven over 10 years. Their love wasn't just a secret. It was a conspiracy, a plot that began with theft. They didn't just steal a necklace. They stole the last valuable item belonging to a dying woman and then built their relationship on that foundation. Nia stood up. Her head was clearer than ever. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, ringing fury. "I need to go back there," she said, staring into the distance. "Where, Nia?" Vivian asked. "To her apartment, the sanctuary. There must be something else. She couldn't have left only the ledger. That was for business. This is personal." Vivian nodded silently, understanding everything without words. Nia took the bus across the city again, but this time she didn't look out the window. She looked inside herself, trying to piece together the scattered fragments of memories from that day 10 years ago. She remembered it vaguely. She was 25. She was at work when her father called and said her mother was having heart trouble. Then the second call, she was gone. The official cause was a massive heart attack. It all happened very quickly. She remembered her father's distraught face, Simone sobbing on his shoulder. She barely knew Darius then. He was just the new guy in the logistics department. No one suspected anything. She stood before the door of apartment number 24 again, turned the old key in the lock again. She entered. The same stale air, the same frozen silence. But now she was looking at everything through different eyes. She wasn't looking for evidence. She was looking for a message. She methodically searched every inch of the small studio. She took every book off the shelves, flipping through all the pages, looking for a note or an underlined sentence. Nothing. She checked all the pockets in her mother's dresses hanging in the closet. Empty. She sat on the sofa, feeling despair begin to creep in again. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was nothing else. Her gaze fell on her mother's old mid-season coat, hanging on a hook by the door. Simple, gray, unremarkable. Her mother wore it in the last months of her life. Nia walked up to it, ran her hand over the coarse wool fabric, and put her hands into the pockets. Empty. She was about to walk away, but something made her stop. She felt the lining again. On the left side, near the chest, the fabric felt slightly denser than elsewhere. She pressed the spot again. Beneath the smooth silk lining was something hard, rectangular, something sewn inside. Her heart began to pound faster. She snatched the kitchen knife from the table and, trying not to damage what was inside, carefully slit the lining along the seam. The silk fabric parted, and a small, plump notebook in a worn leather cover fell to the floor. A diary. Nia picked it up. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. She sat down at the desk and opened the first page. Her mother's handwriting, the same neat, tiny script as in the ledger, but the letters were more alive, more emotional. This was the journal of her last months, and it began to reveal the entire horrible truth that Nia was only beginning to comprehend. August 15th. Elijah is furious again. Simone's bills from Miami came in. He yelled that she would ruin him, but I saw that he was angry at himself for not being able to deny her anything. He's ready to do anything to preserve his little princess's reputation. Nia flipped further. The pages flew by, and each one was like a punch to the gut. September 5th. I think Elijah found a solution. He took us out to dinner with that new logistics man, Darius Vance. A slippery type, he stares at Simone constantly. And Simone, She plays with him like a cat with a mouse. All evening, Elijah praised Nia to him, talking about how reliable and smart she is, what a wonderful wife she would be. I understood his plan. He wants to sell one daughter to save the other. God, the shame. September 22nd. Today, I accidentally overheard Elijah and Simone talking in his office. I thought it was about the debts, but it was far worse. Simone was laughing and saying, "Dad, it's genius. Why should we log the spoiled goods as waste when we can donate them? We'll get tax breaks and the reputation of philanthropists." It was her idea. Hers. My daughter invented a way to poison orphans with spoiled stew to pay for her dresses. I walked into the office, told them it was monstrous. Elijah told me not to meddle, and Simone... She looked at me and laughed in my face, said I didn't understand modern business. Nia closed her eyes. It was hard to breathe. So these weren't just her father's schemes. It was their joint venture, a collaboration between father and favored daughter. She forced herself to read on. The final, fatal date was approaching. The entries became shorter, more anxious. October 10th. I can't watch this anymore. I can't live in the same house as these people. I tried to talk to Elijah again. He said if I told anyone a single word, he'd lock me up in a mental facility. Said I had a bad heart and was imagining things. October 13th. Today, I found my sapphire necklace in Simone's jewelry box, the one they call widow's tears. She just took it. When I asked her why, she answered, "I need it more. Darius likes expensive things." I realized she would stop at nothing. And then, the last entry, written on the day she died. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. October 15th. That's it. I can't be silent anymore. I will stop this. This morning, I told Simone that if she and Elijah didn't confess everything and stop this donation scam by tonight, I would go to the police. I showed her copies of some pages from my ledger. She should have been terrified, remorseful, but she was so calm. Too calm. She said, "Fine, Mom. Let's talk tonight. I'll come to your room after work. She's coming tonight. She'll be here soon." Beneath these words was the last line. She's coming. I don't know why, but I'm scared. The diary ended. Nia sat motionless, staring at those final words. So that's what happened. Her mother gave them an ultimatum, and they answered it. Her heart attack was no accident. She was about to close the diary when she noticed something tucked into a small pocket on the inside of the back cover. She carefully pulled out a yellowed piece of paper folded into quarters. It was a pharmacy receipt. She unfolded it. The receipt bore the name of a local pharmacy. The date was 2 days before her mother's death and a list of medications. Among them was the name of a powerful heart drug that her mother had been taking for years, and at the bottom of the receipt, beneath the list of medications, was a short note written in her mother's hand. A few words, scrawled as if in haste. Simone offered to pick up my new prescription and buy the medicine herself. Said I shouldn't bother. I don't know why, but I'm afraid. Nia sat staring at the pharmacy receipt, a small yellowed piece of paper, but in her hands, it felt as heavy as a tombstone. Everything added up. Her mother's threat to go to the police, Simone's strange, frightening calmness, her sudden desire to help and pick up the medication upon which a life depended. Her mother's heart attack was no accident. At best, it was criminal negligence. Simone could have simply withheld the vital pills. At worst, she could have substituted them, given her something else, or just a placebo. It was murder. Cold, calculated murder, committed by the hands of a beloved daughter. The fury Nia had felt before was nothing compared to what she felt now. This was something else, a cold, calm realization that she was dealing with monsters, and she had to stop them. Not for revenge, but for justice, for her mother, whose last, frightened whisper she now held in her hands. She carefully folded the receipt, placed it back in the diary, and put the diary into her bag along with the ledger. She left the apartment, locking the door behind her. Now, she knew what to do. She arrived at Andre's basement late that evening. He was still at his computer, surrounded by a cloud of tobacco smoke. Seeing her, he jumped up. "Nia, where have you been? I was going crazy here." "I found something else," she said quietly, placing her mother's diary on the desk in front of him. He picked it up and began to read. Nia sat silently opposite him, watching him. She saw the cynical smirk slowly slide off his face. She saw the muscles in his jaw clench, how his eyes darkened. When he reached the last page and read the note on the pharmacy receipt, he put the diary down as if it burned his hands. He was silent for a long time, staring into space. This changes everything," he finally said in a muffled voice. "This is no longer just fraud and libel, it's murder," Nia finished for him. "Yes," he nodded, "it's murder." He stood up and began to pace his small room. "We have to go to the police immediately. The district attorney's office." "Useless," Nia replied calmly. "Who are we going to complain to? The city police chief is my father's best friend. They go golfing together. The state prosecutor owes his appointment to him. They won't even let us through the door. And if they do, this diary will get lost the same day. And you and I will be charged with slander and attempting to damage the honest name of a respected man." Andre stopped. He knew she was right. In this city, her father was the police. He was the law. Then what? What do we do? Helplessness rang in his voice. "We need them to confess themselves," Nia said. "Publicly. We need a voluntary admission of guilt. Only that will work." Andre looked at her with bewilderment. "Confess, Nia? These people will never confess to anything. They would sooner kill again to hide the truth." "Then we have to corner them." A hardened look that Andre had never seen before appeared on her face. "We have to create a situation where silence is scarier for them than a confession." They spent the entire next week developing a plan, and her father, Simone, and Darius, unknowingly, handed them the perfect weapon. City posters and news portals were plastered with announcements for the city's main social event of the year, the annual Founders Gala. And the guest of honor was to be Elijah Hayes. As part of a campaign to clean up the family's image after the wedding scandal, he was making a powerful public relations move. He was not only the main sponsor of the event, but was also scheduled to receive an honorary award for his contribution to the city's development and the preservation of family values. During his acceptance speech, he planned to officially announce Darius Vance as his successor and the new CEO of the factory. This was to be his complete and final victory. A triumphant ball. "This is our stage," Andre said, showing Nia the poster. "We couldn't have picked a better place. The entire city elite, the press. If we're going to strike, it has to be there." "But how do we make them talk?" Nia asked. "We have to frighten them, make them believe we know everything and are ready to tell. They have to panic, and a person in a panic makes mistakes." Nia understood what she had to do. She knew the weak link in their chain. Calvin. The next day, she waited for him outside the factory gate after his shift. She knew he always walked the same route home through the old park. She simply stepped out from behind a tree to meet him. Seeing her, Calvin flinched and paled. He tried to walk around her, but she blocked his path. "Don't be afraid, Mr. Jasper," she said softly. "I don't hold a grudge against you." He looked at her in surprise. "I understand everything," she continued, looking him directly in the eyes. "You have a family, obligations. I might have done the same thing in your place. I didn't come here to accuse you. I came to tell you that everything is fine." He frowned distrustfully, not understanding what she was getting at. I found my mother's old diary," Nia said, her voice shaking slightly, but there was no deceit in it. "I read it. And I understood a lot. I understood why everything happened the way it did. Her last days. There are so many details in the diary that explain everything. It's all clear to me now." She spoke vaguely on purpose, without specifying any details. She was dropping bait. "I just wanted you to know that I'm not angry with you," she finished. "Goodbye." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the park in complete confusion and fear. She had no doubt what he would do. A person living in fear always runs to their master. She was right. Andre, using old contacts, asked a friendly phone technician to trace the calls from Calvin's number. An hour after her conversation with him, Calvin called one single person, Elijah Hayes. The conversation was short, less than a minute. The trap had sprung. Now, all they had to do was wait. They didn't have to wait long. That same evening, as Nia sat with Vivian in the kitchen, there was a knock on the door, loud, insistent. Vivian went to open it. Nia heard her aunt's surprised exclamation, and then Darius's voice. "What do you want here, Vance? Get out," Vivian said. "I need to talk to Nia," he replied brazenly. "I know she's here." He shoved the older woman aside and entered the house. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw Nia. His face held a mixture of anger, fear, and some sort of false confidence. He was wearing an expensive suit. He smelled of success and anxiety. "Nia, we need to talk," he said, trying to keep his tone businesslike. "Alone." "Speak here. Vivian is my family." Nia cut him off. He was momentarily flustered, but quickly composed himself. He walked to the table and placed an expensive leather briefcase on it. He opened it. The briefcase was filled with stacks of $100 bills. "There's $250,000, $250,000 here," he said. "Cash. If it's not enough, tell me how much you want. Name your price, Nia." Nia silently looked at the money, then at him. "The price for what?" Darius sighed deeply. "For the diary. For your mother's diary. Let's end this circus. You take the money, you leave the city, you start a new life, and we all just forget about it. We can all walk away from this without losses." Nia slowly rose from her chair. She looked at his scared face, at the money, at his trembling hands. They were terrified. They believed she knew everything and had come to bargain. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Get out," she said quietly and distinctly. "Just get out of this house." He was taken aback. "Nia, don't be a fool. This is your only chance. Think about it." "I said get out and tell Elijah and Simone," she paused, "that we'll see them at the gala." Darius's face twisted. He understood the negotiation had failed. He snapped the briefcase shut, grabbed it, and throwing Nia a look full of hatred, bolted out of the house. Nia remained standing in the middle of the kitchen. The trap was set, and they, scared to death, were walking right into it. The days remaining until the gala passed in a haze of quiet, tense anticipation. Nia and Andre worked out every detail. Andre arranged for his old friend Malcolm, a reporter from a regional newspaper in a neighboring state, the only major publication not controlled by Elijah Hayes, to come, posing as an ordinary guest. Vivian, using her status as a founding family member, easily secured 3 invitations, one for herself, one for Nia, and one for her friend from out of state, Mr. Malcolm. Everything was ready. And then the evening came. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel sparkled. Huge crystal chandeliers, reflected in the gleaming polished floor, flooded everything with dazzling light. A string orchestra played. Servers in white gloves carried champagne and canapes. The air buzzed with hundreds of voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The entire city elite was here. The mayor, officials, bankers, industrialists, their wives in diamonds and evening gowns. It was a parade of hypocrisy. And Nia, walking into the room on Vivian's arm, felt as if she had entered a viper pit. She wore a simple black dress, long and severe, without a single piece of jewelry. It was the complete opposite of her wedding dress and the bright, loud gowns of the other women. Next to her, Vivian, in her old-fashioned but elegant velvet dress, looked like a queen in exile. At the entrance, 2 security guards in strict suits, clearly briefed about her, tried to stop them. "Pardon me, Miss Hayes," one of them began, blocking the way. But Vivian didn't even slow her step. She measured the guard with an icy stare. "This is my guest, young man, or do you have orders not to admit guests to the Founders' Gala?" The guard deflated. He recognized Vivian. Arguing with her was tantamount to career suicide. He silently stepped aside. They walked into the ballroom. Andre and Malcolm were already there, sitting at an inconspicuous table in the corner with a clear view of the stage. Andre caught Nia's eye and gave a subtle nod. The center of attention, of course, was her family. Elijah, in a flawless tuxedo, stood surrounded by the mayor and the city's most influential people, accepting congratulations. He was in his element, the powerful, confident master of his universe. Darius, the loyal heir, stood nearby, smiling respectfully. And Simone was the star of the evening. She wore a luxurious gold-embroidered gown with an elaborate updo, and, of course, the sapphire necklace glittered on her neck. She was laughing the loudest, drinking glass after glass of champagne, but in her eyes Nia noticed a feverish, anxious glint. They saw her, all three of them. The smile on Elijah's face froze for a fraction of a second. Darius tensed, and Simone shot her a look full of hatred and poorly concealed fear. The ceremony began. The host spent a long time complimenting Elijah Hayes, listing his contributions to the city. Then the mayor stepped onto the stage and, to thunderous applause, presented him with a heavy crystal statuette, the Family Legacy Award. Elijah approached the microphone. The room quieted. "My dear friends," he began in his well-trained, confident voice, "it is a tremendous honor for me to stand here today. But this award is not just mine. This award belongs to my entire family. A family for whom concepts like honesty, integrity, and responsibility to the community have always been and always will be paramount. These are the values I inherited from my parents and which I pass on to my children." Nia slowly walked forward. She walked straight across the room between the tables toward the stage. People parted, watching her with surprised and judgmental looks. The music faded. Everyone was looking at her. Elijah on the stage faltered. He saw her approaching, and cold anger flashed in his eyes. But he was a professional. He pretended nothing was happening and continued his speech. Simone was not a professional. Seeing Nia walking straight toward them, she panicked. Alcohol and fear did their work. She took a few steps toward Nia, intercepting her at the very edge of the stage. Her face was contorted with malice. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, loud enough only for them to hear. "Do you think you can ruin everything? This evening is ours. Darius is mine. The factory is mine." She was so close that Nia could smell the champagne on her breath. Nia didn't look away. She looked at her sister calmly, almost pityingly, and then looked at the sapphires sparkling on her neck. "The necklace is yours too?" she asked quietly but clearly. "Or did you just take it after you switched her pills?" Time stopped. Color slowly drained from Simone's face. It turned white as paper, then gray. Her eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on Nia's face. Her breath caught in her throat. The applause that had begun at the end of Elijah's speech choked off. Everyone in the front rows saw that something terrible was happening. Simone slowly turned her head toward the stage, where her father, interrupting his speech, was looking at them with icy fury. She sought salvation from him, her face twisted into a childish, desperate grimace. "Daddy!" she screamed across the silent hall. Her voice cracked into a shriek. "Daddy! Tell her she's lying! Tell all of them!" Elijah Hayes stood in the spotlight, his flawless reputation, his triumph, his family values. All of it was crumbling before the eyes of the entire city. He looked at his sobbing, panicking daughter, and he made his choice. He leaned into the microphone. His voice was cold, lifeless, and deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. "Security, please escort my daughter from the hall. She is unwell." Simone froze. She stared at her father, unable to believe her ears. He hadn't protected her. He hadn't saved her. He had just publicly disowned her in front of everyone, throwing her away like a broken toy to save himself. "Unwell?" she whispered, and a terrifying, chilling realization dawned in her voice. Her gaze darted from her father to Nia and back again. Her lips trembled. "It was you! You did this!" Simone's words, thrown at her father, were not loud, but in the dead silence of the hall, they cut through the air like a scalpel. The security guards, who had started toward her, hesitated, awaiting a new command. Elijah stood on the stage, petrified. His face, triumphant just a minute ago, turned into a gray mask. Simone recoiled from him as if from fire. She stumbled back a few steps away from the stage, toward the huge, echoing lobby. She turned and practically ran, tripping over the hem of her luxurious gown. It was a flight from her father, from Nia, from the hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her with stunned, horrified curiosity. And at that moment, everyone moved. Elijah, snapping out of it, quickly stepped off the stage. He couldn't let her escape. He couldn't let this conversation continue here. He rushed after her. Darius, pale as death, realizing that his brilliant future had just vanished like smoke, instinctively followed his patron. Nia moved after them calmly, without rushing. She knew this wasn't the end yet. This was the finale, and she had to play her part. Behind her, like shadows, slid Andre, and next to him Malcolm, the reporter. Their smartphones were already in their hands. The small red recording lights glowed in the dim light. They were predators who had smelled blood. They emerged into the massive marble-paneled lobby. The echo of their footsteps boomed under the high arches. Guests spilled out from the ballroom behind them but kept their distance, forming a living semicircle at the entrance. No one wanted to miss the climax. Simone reached a massive column and stopped, pressing her back against it. She was cornered. Elijah, Darius, and Nia surrounded her. "Stop the hysterics, Simone," Elijah hissed, trying to grab her arm. "You don't understand what you're doing." She shrieked, yanking her arm away. "It was me. You just sacrificed me in front of the whole city." She turned to Nia. Madness and hatred mingled with fear in her eyes. "You won't prove anything," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Nothing! You have nothing but your sick fantasies." Nia silently took a step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She simply pulled 2 items from her small clutch bag, the plump notebook in the old leather cover, and the yellowed pharmacy receipt. She didn't open them. She simply held them in her hand like irrefutable evidence. "I don't need to, Simone," she said quietly. "You've already confessed everything." Your face said more than any proof. Darius saw the diary. He recognized it. He had seen that same notebook in Nia's hands the night he came to bargain. And he realized the game was over. All his ambitions, his CEO chair, his future, all of it was in that little notebook. And the cowardly, selfish instinct for self-preservation took over. He took a step aside, physically separating himself from Elijah and Simone. He raised his hands as if surrendering to an invisible police force. "I have nothing to do with this," he quickly interjected, addressing Nia and the invisible crowd behind her. "I didn't know anything. I was just covering their family debts. Mr. Hayes said they were having temporary difficulties. About her mother, about the medicine, this is the first I've heard. I myself am a victim of their schemes." It was betrayal, instant, total, and vile. He threw them under the bus to try and save his own skin. Elijah looked at him with contempt, but he had no time for Darius now. All his attention was focused on the diary in Nia's hands. That diary was a bomb that was about to explode his entire life, his entire empire built on lies. And at that moment, his sanity broke. Only one instinct remained: destroy the threat. He made a fatal mistake. He lunged forward, not at Nia, but at the diary. He reached out, trying to snatch, to claw the evidence from her hands, but Simone stood in his way. In this last, decisive moment, seeing her father not as the omnipotent patriarch, but as a terrified old man who had first disowned her and was now trying to steal a book like a petty thief, she understood everything. Everyone had betrayed her, and her last chance for salvation was to drown the one who was dragging her down. She violently shoved her father. Elijah, not expecting it, stumbled backward and hit the column. Simone turned to Nia. Her face was wet with tears, her makeup streaked. She looked like a deranged actress in the finale of a tragedy. "It was him!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at her father. "He told me! He planned everything! He said Mom was weak, that her heart would kill her anyway soon. He said she was in our way, in the way of the business. He said I was the future of this family, and she was the past, dragging us back." She spoke, gasping between sobs and the words that burst forth after 10 years of silence. "The pills! He said we just had to help her so she wouldn't suffer. He said no one would find out. He forced me. I didn't want to. I didn't want to." It was a full, unconditional confession. Theft, conspiracy, murder, and all of it under the light of crystal chandeliers, before the eyes of the city's shocked elite, under the merciless gaze of 2 recording smartphones. At that moment, people in police uniform quickly entered the hall. Andre, seeing that the climax was near, had managed to call his contact in the precinct. Chaos erupted. Camera flashes. Malcolm had pulled out his professional camera. They flickered, snatching faces contorted with horror from the dim light. Police officers, pushing through the stunned guests, headed straight for them. "Elijah Hayes, you are under arrest on suspicion of organizing a murder." "Simone Hayes, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder." "Darius Vance, you are under arrest on suspicion of complicity and grand larceny." Elijah was silent. He stared into space. His face was utterly impassive. He had lost. Simone was sobbing, screaming that she was innocent, clinging to the officer's arms. Darius muttered something about cooperating with the investigation, about telling everything. Handcuffs clicked on their wrists. They were led through the crowd of stunned guests toward the exit. The ball of triumph had turned into the scaffold. The legacy of the Hayes family was destroyed in one evening, publicly and irreversibly. Nia stood motionless, clutching the diary and the ledger to her chest. Vivian walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, child." Nia looked up at her. There was neither joy nor malice in her eyes, only enormous, all-consuming exhaustion. "No," she said quietly, "it's only just beginning." 6 months later. The morning was cold but sunny. The air smelled of metal and fresh paint. Nia stood on the loading dock, looking down at the grounds of Hayes Family Foods. After the sensational court case that rocked the entire nation, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Elijah Hayes and Simone received long prison sentences for murder. Darius, as a key witness, got off with probation for fraud and disappeared from the city. Nia, as the only untainted heir, was appointed external administrator of the company by the court. It was a heavy, nearly impossible task to resurrect the business from the ashes, but she succeeded. Vivian stood beside her. She was now Nia's right hand, her advisor, her true family. "We're starting the conveyor belt in 10 minutes, Vivian said, watching the workers bustling below. "People are ready to get back to work." "Me too," Nia smiled. She had sold the small sanctuary apartment near Riverbend. The place that held her mother's pain had to do some good. With all the proceeds, and adding a portion of her own funds, she created a charitable foundation named after her mother, the Eleanor Hayes Foundation. The foundation's first and main project was the complete renovation of the very children's home her father had poisoned for years. Now, the foundation ensured they received deliveries of the freshest, highest quality products. Her victory was not in vengeance, it was in the restoration of justice. Nia looked at the factory logo. The old letters, Hayes Family Foods, had been taken down. In their place shone a new laconic inscription, Eleanor's Products. Below, a whistle blew, and the conveyor belt slowly crawled, carrying the first cans of new, honest product. Nia took a deep breath of the cold morning air. Her war was over. Her life was beginning anew, and she was ready for it. And so this complex and dramatic story concludes, my friends. A story about the betrayal of those closest to us, but at the same time, a story about the incredible strength of one woman who was able to go against everyone and restore justice. I'm sure it left a mark on everyone. And perhaps the main question that remains with all of us after the finale, Did Naya do the right thing? On the one hand, she exposed thieves, fraudsters, and even murderers. She stopped a terrible crime, as her father and sister had been poisoning orphans and the elderly for years. She cleared her mother's name and revived the family business on the principles of integrity. Her victory seems absolute. But on the other hand, the price of that victory was horrible. She personally destroyed her own family, sending her biological father and sister to prison. Was justice worth such total annihilation? Was there another, perhaps less brutal path for her? Could she have found the strength to forgive them, or are such crimes unforgivable? What do you think about this? We would really like to hear your opinion. Perhaps you have some questions about the plot. Did something seem incomplete, or are you just curious about what happened to the other characters? Please don't hesitate to write everything that is on your mind in the comments below this video. I will make sure to read all your thoughts. And of course, if this story touched you, if you sympathized with Nia and followed her struggle with bated breath, please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Your likes and comments are the best reward for us and an incentive to create new, even more captivating stories for you. All the best. At the end of this video, a window will appear in the middle of the screen. Please click on this window. Our other most interesting stories will be there.